The following presentation contains content that will offend the virtue signaling of both the left and the right, and may be a very fake threat to the fake news of our fake democracy. Viewer discretion is advised.
Nope. Fuck that. No. Worship me.
Paradigm Shift.
An educational comedy.
It's not a cause, not a movement.
It's not a social group you can slap a label onto.
It's an idea. It's an intention.
It's an intuition.
A mindset in which reality can be explored.
It's a genuine expression,
Discernment.
critical thinking, and imagination.
To look inward upon ourselves.
To better understand the external world around us.
And yes,
Few egos are bound to be bruised.
With our silly, zany, politically incorrect,
George Carlin built style of going about things.
real and raw honesty.
Which invites you to be
to the fullest.
Just 100 years earlier, the printing press had been a simple, hand-operated contrivance. In 1 century, it had developed into a large and complicated machine. Through the years following, improvements came rapidly, and today the printing industry is highly organized, with scores of specialized jobs.
Our news and entertainment media is so much more than merely politically biased. It's evolved into the single greatest threat to our culture, security, and way of life. After decades of acquisition, infiltration, and subversion, the media in the Western world now functions as the tip of the spear wielded by our kakistocratic oligarchy, their most potent weapon with which to reshape the world in their own image. An institution intended to be a means of objectively educating and informing the public, it now acts as a tool for a handful of banking families and their vassals to attractively brand themselves, their corporate entities, products and services, and most importantly, their ideas, concepts, and worldview in the most positive manner possible, while simultaneously destroying all opposition. A means for molding and shaping the public. The willful shepherding of the public consciousness, with the aim of reshaping cultures and nations. It's no longer an exaggeration to state that the goal here seems to be a literal reprogramming of the individual into a fully domesticated and controllable consumerist entity. One that not only doesn't ask dangerous questions, but has been conditioned and trained to mock, shame, and marginalize those who do.
Do you have any people being paid by the CIA who are contributing to a major circulation American journal?
We do have people who submit pieces to American journals.
Do you have any people paid by the CIA who are working for television networks.
This, I think, gets into the kind of getting into the details, Mr. Chairman, that I'd like to get into in executive session.
Those of you sufficiently far down your red pill path certainly know what I'm referring to here. But to anyone that may consider this a bit extreme or conspiratorial, stop and give some concerted thought for a moment to just how absurd it'd be if this weren't the case. Considering that our culture and politics are all downstream from prevailing public opinions, and that public opinions are shaped by mass media more than any other single force, how could anyone assume that the most ambitious and unscrupulous elements in our world wouldn't seek the megaphone that mass media provides by any means necessary? Consider the amount of incentive and motive force felt by these ambitious elements, and compare it to the amount of incentivizing energy felt by those who merely seek to inform people on the day-to-day goings-on of the world around them. Which of these two incentives do you think is the stronger force? Which of these two groups might be more motivated, more organized and well-funded, more purposeful and far-sighted and efficient? It's a delusion to presume that those few honest souls practicing real journalism, looking to inform and educate without any ulterior motive, could retain positions of influence and control in major media institutions over the years, or act as any meaningful checks and balances against intelligence agencies, foreign governments, megacorporations, and the banking families that seem to control all of the above.
This is a dark day in America, as far as I'm concerned, for any patriot or anyone who believes in a constitutional republic and who believes in the rule of law, believes in liberty and justice above all. This type of the tactics deployed, if these people have their way, would make Lavrenti Beria and Stalin and Himmler and the rest of them, embarrassed or proud. Let's just say they would absolutely love to have this type of power. It's a disgrace. It's a disgusting, appalling abuse. It's been systematized, which clearly is run by partisan mercenaries. These people, the evil in them never rests. They are persistent, ruthless, vicious mercenaries, partisan hacks who have taken control of our government, the abuse of power. I have not seen such a railroading. And they're setting the stage. They are asserting their power, the way they operate. And where is the president? Okay, the president has, in my opinion, tweeting, I have to agree with Roger, is not getting it anymore. He needs to, it's unfortunate. He's let it, I think, go too far at this point. It's going to have to go to its natural conclusion. Nobody is off limits. What we're up against, people need to realize this isn't left versus right. This isn't Democrat versus Republican. This is fascist versus freedom fighters. I served in the Berlin Brigade, and I was proud to do so right after the wall came down, and I saw firsthand what Soviet communism and its satellite states and the oppression of socialism looked like. 40 years after the war, there were still bullet-scarred buildings. You would drive through these streets of Potsdam or say, any of these marginal cities outside of West Berlin, and it was a nightmare. It was dark. People didn't even come out of doors. There was no brightness, no life to it. This is what these people sit in, the luxury and the wealth and the opulence of Western capitalism and Western Enlightenment values, and throw stones at it. And I'm almost speechless to put my finger on it. It really can be disconcerting, and I understand how you kind of have to catch yourself sometimes, because those of us who have seen this coming and have tried to warn our fellow citizens and say, look, this isn't a game. This isn't political gamesmanship here. We are talking about ruthless people. It's a literal police state that has co-opted our government, abused our justice system, corrupted every process of government they can, while they install their deep state puppets and minions in there. It boggles the mind, and it's like, where they talk about, where are the adults in the room? Where are the righteous people? I mean, they've literally, I think, the years of Clinton, Bush, and Obama drained the swamp, literally, well, not drained the swamp, but it rid Washington, D.C. of anybody with any integrity left. They are exactly what we've said they're about all along, which is about power, control, and the ruthless mercenary use of our government, what was once our government, I should say, to carry out the political personal objectives of ruthless criminals that are living on another planet. They've literally constructed these fantasies in their mind. This is where I question the president's choice in terms of who he's having counsel him, because our government is no longer our own. And when I say our, I mean the people.
If we were to change the world, we would have to change the media. The sordid state of affairs on our planet is largely due to a misguided, misinformed, and deliberately miseducated mass populace. Public opinion and mindset is largely controlled by the mainstream media. To a large extent, this has been the purpose of the mainstream media from a historical context. Much the same can be said for our imposed educational systems, as both have been developed with the specific intention of manipulating the public into believing and supporting a system of enslavement. It is important to recognize that education and media are inextricably linked. In order to truly affect a massive number of people into moving into a creative and constructive pattern of behavior, we need to change the purpose and effect of media as we know it. Our minds have been enslaved by the mind-numbing, repetitive mass media programming that has been put out for consumption by a largely controlled mainstream media global network. Only 4 corporations own all major news networks and the best-selling papers and magazines. Much like the educational institutions, we put unquestionable faith in the media and the versions of reality it portrays. Due to the fact that people put unquestionable faith in the media, it has massive influence over people and can affect them in many ways. The effects of media largely influence the way in which we view and interact with the world. There are several recognizable tactics used to do this, such as priming. In some cases, media messages may cause us to recall old ideas, knowledge, or experience. For example, a news story about the French presidential elections may trigger thoughts about the French economy, or remind one of a past trip to Paris, or to pick up some French brie when doing your grocery shopping. Agenda setting, also known as gatekeeping, refers to the fact that the media controls the information we get, and therefore what we think. Editors have a lot of power here because they are ultimately the ones who decide what we are thinking about. Then there is framing, which refers to the particular treatment, angle, or spin applied to a message, which often ends up shaping our opinions about current affairs and who the good guys are in any situation. Agenda setting is deciding which story to tell, and framing is deciding how to tell them. Most media messages, like adverts and public information campaigns, including news bulletins, are designed to change our attitudes and behavior. Factors that increase the likelihood of success include likability, credibility, or attractiveness of a source, the arguments used, and the people who seem to agree with them. Media also plays a role in persuading people to adopt new ideas or practices. Often, they first communicate the message about the new idea, which then spreads over interpersonal networks, expanding over time to include social leaders, peers, and the community. This eventually leads to the adoption of the idea innovation, reaching a critical mass. In today's world, it is impossible to escape media influence, so what we need to do is to change it, and in so doing, we will change the world.
There's also a leftward bias extending across all races and cultures represented in media, of course. But bias is far too soft a word here, and viewing the bias as merely political is too narrow a perspective. What's occurred over the past few decades was no organic drift towards one end of the political spectrum, but something far more profound. As I've mentioned in other videos, the type of cultural change ushered in by the adherents of the Frankfurt School after World War II was no accident. It was laid out clearly beforehand in several books and articles, a willful and well-orchestrated plan to bring about a complete shift in worldview. To turn traditional America, with its nuclear family and Western culture and traditions as its foundation, into something very, very different. Many years ago, I'd have considered these ideas of the media being a relatively monolithic force to be a bit extreme. overly conspiratorial. I even spent a great deal of time seeking to disprove the theories. The more I did so, the deeper I dug, the more obvious it became, and the more I began to see that the situation was much more severe than I could have imagined. Now, in retrospect, and with the ability to look back with far more context, it makes a great deal of sense. To think that those who seek ultimate power at any cost wouldn't recognize the psychological power of the news media, and thus seek to add it to their arsenal of tools at their earliest convenience, strikes me as absurd. These are men who recognize better than anyone the power of perception, of branding. Men instilled with that invaluable recognition shared by all of the most effective manipulators and deceivers throughout history, that one can get away with murder in their personal and professional lives, often for a lifetime at no outward cost, as long as such actions are hidden from the public view, and the image conveyed is instead one of a philanthropist or a paragon of virtue surrounding themselves with a cloak of all the right words and lofty sentiments, aligning with a new moral code developed by the cultural Marxist philosophers and ideologues.
Walk in, go to the Supreme Court. I believe in you, Hillary. I've been to Rwanda. I've been to your hospital in Rwanda. I've seen all the good you've done. I believe in you. Women need you. Minorities need you. I need you. Chicago needs you. We all need you. This country needs you to stand up and walk into the Supreme Court and say one vote equals one vote. What's wrong with that? What's the debate?
I definitely feel his passion. There's other people out here who feel the same way.
A mere 6 corporations now own nearly every last vestige of major media. What's worse, there is little to no daylight between these corporations with regards to their ideologies and worldviews. They're all marching to the beat of a similar drum. And what's more disturbing is the discovery that the heads of these institutions meet regularly behind closed doors with politicians and corporate leaders at events like the Bilderberg Group or the Bohemian Grove gatherings. The future of our world is being increasingly shaped by less and less honest and principled men in more and more secretive conditions. And it should thus come as no surprise that skyrocketing corruption is the inevitable result.
We are grateful to the Washington Post, the New York Times, Time Magazine, and other publications whose directors have attended our meetings and respected their promises of discretion for almost 40 years. It would have been impossible for us to develop our plan for the world if we had been subject to the bright lights of publicity. But the world is now more sophisticated and prepared to march toward a world government.
An illusory existence is the inevitable result. Having our day-to-day reality dictated for us from on high is the inevitable result. If a major event happens and it isn't covered in the press, it's not a major event. If an exceedingly minor event happens and it's covered in an excited and histrionic manner by the press, it's a truly major event, often with pronounced long-term ramifications to prevailing culture. The power of being able to pick and choose what is a story and what isn't on the world stage can't possibly be overstated. Our nation has been gripped with anti-Russian hysteria since the election, without a single shred of proof of anything nefarious or illegal. Yet the DNC refusing to give their server over to the FBI, and the related Awan Brothers scandal, in which a large number of our senators and representatives seem to have been spied on by foreign nations, or the soft coup attempt against a sitting president by the corrupt FBI, CIA, and foreign intelligence groups, receive virtually no honest attention or in-depth coverage by the press. To give another quick example, a few years ago, a man by the name of George Soros and a few like minds decided to funnel a great deal of money into the manifesting of social and cultural change. Around the same time, although there was no overall increase in white police officer shootings with black victims, the media chose to begin publicizing each and every one of these incidents for months on end, with nearly round-the-clock coverage. Incidents in which a minority officer was involved were ignored, as were incidents in which the victim happened to be Asian, Mexican, or white. The only stories the national news media chose to highlight were those that fit the specific narrative they sought to push. Within mere weeks, millions of Americans were incensed. riots and near riots were occurring across the nation. 5 officers were gunned down in cold blood in Texas, and an organization called Black Lives Matter was born. Again, although there was no overall increase in the types of incidents relative to the averages over previous decades, because the issue became the primary focus of national media, and because their focus was so biased and emotionally charged, the nation was suddenly on the brink of mass racial violence. And the tactics made use of are brilliantly effective. The Soviet Union used re-education camps and the one-dimensional tactic of drumming facts into the brains of a captive population. With the help of thinkers like Edward Bernays and Gustave Le Bon, the tactics employed in the modern West are far more effective. Democracy provides the illusion of freedom and control. Because our media isn't controlled by the state, we have the illusion of a free press. And finally, taking a page from Stanley Kubrick, they've learned the power of subtlety. Only an amateur propagandist comes out and states their opinion and asks others to adopt it. A skilled propagandist feigns a dispassionate objectivity and dances around the idea they're trying to convey. A CNN anchor might use terms like experts say or anonymous sources tell us, and provide countless suggestive hints and leading questions, allowing the listener or viewer to fill in the obvious blanks. This creates the illusion of independent thinking, of having reached a conclusion on one's own based on the fact picture presented. Such a conclusion is far more powerful and lasting than one forcibly and obviously imposed from the outside. And such is the power of the modern press. Ideas, good or bad, helpful or harmful, now spread like a wildly contagious virus to hundreds of millions within the span of mere days. The public becomes a flock to be herded and managed. The genius of these men is that they've discovered the means to indoctrinate hundreds of millions through the use of a relatively small handful of well-placed men. An efficiency so incredible that it becomes difficult to believe. They do this by playing upon our noble instincts as human beings, and merely setting the stage upon which useful idiots will then clamor for positions as actors and actresses, and in doing so display their moral and ethical virtue to the world. In other words, they manufacture a dishonest foundational premise, and then sit back and watch as their puppets build upon that foundation, with the end result being a facade of a structure that captivates much of the world, and one that appears to be a relatively organic happening. One of the most embarrassing examples of this would be the Coney 2012 phenomenon, in which almost overnight, millions of Americans went from complete ignorance to the daily slaughters on the African continent to armchair heroes, donating hundreds of millions to various shady institutions, wearing bracelets, posting hashtags, or remember the anthrax and yellow cake and weapons of mass destruction scares from Iraq, all of which turned out to be brazen lies. The tying of Saddam Hussein to the events of 9/11, or this heart-wrenching testimony, which many Americans claimed had the most profound effect of all with regards to their opinions on whether or not to go into Iraq.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, my name is Naira, and I just came out of Kuwait. While I was there, I saw the Iraqi soldiers come into the hospital with guns. They took the babies out of the incubators, and left the children to die on the cold floor.
We discovered years later that this girl was acting, a daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador playing a role for the cameras. Complete and total fraud. The greatest power of these manipulators springs in large part from their nature. They are utilitarian. They are chameleons. They aren't bound by any firm codes of ethics or behavior. They present their ends as morally justified and all-important, and use this as cover to pursue any means to those ends, all the while knowing that they control the lens through which we'll view the events. 500,000 human lives were lost in the Iraq War, and 200,000 completely innocent civilians due to our adventures in Iraq and Afghanistan since 2001. The passive ignorance in our nation has real-world consequences. Consequences I think we rarely stop to consider. The press now plays a leading role in manipulating election outcomes, more aggressively with each passing election cycle. We're all aware of the difference in coverage of Hillary and Trump, and how a nation equally divided along political lines somehow has a national news media in which nary a single individual could be found backing one of the two candidates. But some have already forgotten how Bernie was railroaded, and just how complicit the press was in this crime. Let's go back a bit further to 2012, in which a legitimate grassroots movement had catapulted Ron Paul into winning poll after poll as he spoke to packed and energetic venues, and his competitors were hard-pressed to fill a few hundred seats.
Romney had about 1,000 people in the crowd, making the event look like a total flop.
I guess we had a hard time finding a large enough place to meet, and this certainly is.
Romney's campaign couldn't even fill all the chairs in the audience.
The media sprang into action with a flurry of mocking and demeaning coverage in which news personalities would laugh derisively at the man, his chances, and his supporters.
Right now, live, right next to the bus behind us, Ron Paul is speaking, and 7 of the candidates are here today. We have live pictures of Ron Paul, but you know what? We're talking about Sarah Palin, we're talking about Rick Perry, the two people not in the race yet, Drew.
And guess what, Paul? If you get video of Sarah Palin or get a soundbite from her, bring that back to us. You can hold the Ron Paul stuff.
To run for president at CPAC, but reaction, not exactly warm and fuzzy.
The winner of this year's CPAC straw poll is now... Okay. Well, the winner of this year's CPAC straw poll is Texas Congressman Ron Paul.
In the end, he was the winner. Probably not the reaction he was hoping for when you named a favorite to run for the White House. Mixed applause and boos as Ron Paul was announced over the weekend. The fiery Texas Republican, no doubt unfazed by the reaction. He's live with me now from Capitol Hill, winner of that straw poll for the second year in a row. How you doing, sir? Congressman
I'm doing fine.
Welcome back.
I'm doing fine, thank you.
So who was in the audience booing you? Did you get a name on the head? Did you get an ID on those people? In the audience booing you. Did you get a name on the head? During a live introduction to Congressman Ron Paul on Tuesday, America's Newsroom incorrectly aired a clip from the 2010 CPAC event in Washington rather than this year's event. It was clearly a mistake. We used the wrong videotape. There are similarities in the shot between last year's event and this year. 2011 screen left, 2010 screen right. Ron Paul won both years. However, there were audible boos in 2010, while you heard a lot more cheering this year. It's an honest mistake. We apologize for the error. We look forward to having Representative Paul back on our program very soon.
The winner of the straw poll this year, Congressman
the audience booing you.
Next, they began simply not displaying the polls in which he won or placed second. At times even displaying the poll results with his name missing, as if he wasn't involved in the poll at all.
some Republicans out there have been saying that Ron Paul would be very dangerous for this country because he wants to bring troops like you back from your post from all over the world.
Well, I think it would be even more dangerous to start nitpicking wars with other countries. Someone like Iran, Israel is more than capable.
All right, we just lost our tech connection, unfortunately, with Dana. Dana, stand by if you can hear me. We're going to get back. You want to go to Candy Crowley over at Mitt Romney headquarters. People are beginning to fill up that room over there, Candy.
Finally, the third phase, a complete and total media blackout. They decided to not even mention the man's name.
I mean, if you look, somebody told me, from this last debate, I thought I did rather well. And they went down the number of times they mentioned the other three candidates in the review of the debate. And it was, like 80, 90 times, depending on which it was. I was mentioned one time in all the discussion of the debate after it was over. Right. Now, you might argue I didn't win, or some people argue that I did.
You had the juice.
But it deserved more than one mention on all the stations. Somebody went and added these all up.
Thank you, Congressman.
So what's going on here? You're in this media business. I'd like to know exactly how that comes about.
I had a printout of how many...
It's legitimate. These things are pretty incendiary,
Because of people like you.
No. Come on. Some of the stuff was very incendiary, and saying that in 1993 the Israelis were responsible for the bombing of the World Trade Center, that kind of stuff. All right. I appreciate your answer. Appreciate your answering the questions, and you understand it's our job to answer.
Thank you.
You don't? Okay. I understand.
The sad reality is this: facts have ceased to matter. The news and entertainment media, when acting as a unified entity, can cause the majority of a nation to believe in virtually anything, no matter how absurd, and they can do so with terrifying efficiency. Again, the reasons for this are fairly straightforward when we stop to give it proper consideration. The world is a sea of nearly infinite information, and we live finite and busy lives. We don't have the time to seek out the factual realities regarding every pressing issue facing humanity. Instead, we trust those who we believe to be experts and specialists to act as screens to help sort and sift this sea of information into readily understandable elements. If the two choices are to buy into the general narratives from the press, or to assume they're essentially working together in a conspiratorial manner and willfully misleading the public, many Americans will still choose the first. Terrified of the shame involved in being a conspiracy theorist, many people refrain from even looking into such topics. A truly free and independent press acts as the backbone and foundation of a healthy nation. No other institution has such powerful tools to encourage justice and champion our most valued virtues and ethics, to expose corruption, to keep politicians honest. We've lost this completely. Our bards have become sick and compromised men. All I've just said may be unsettling and a bit depressing, but there is light on the horizon. I believe the Trump phenomenon has changed everything. The power of truly great propaganda is its creation of an artificial reality that is just similar enough to actual reality that the public is willing to buy into it, and is thus pulled into the story, absorbed into the narrative. The election of Trump threw the media into a panicked frenzy, and caused them to step on the accelerator, to the extent that even the most moderate voters are now recognizing something is very wrong. And they're now in an ultimately unwinnable situation, with record-low trust ratings from the public, and voters walking away from establishment candidates in droves.
Bonjour, CPAC! Hello, my fellow conservatives! I hope that Americans really like French accents. Okay, and I hope too that you see me as less terrifying than the American media depicts me.
How many refugees has Poland taken?
0.
And you're proud of that?
If you are asking me, if you are asking me about Muslims illegal immigration, none, not even one will come to Poland. Not even one if it's illegal. We took over 2 million Ukrainians who are working, who are peaceful in Poland. We will not receive even one Muslim because this is what we promised.
But I asked not about illegal immigrants, I asked about refugees. And Jean-Claude Juncker, the Commission President, says that you're racist. You sound proud of the fact that you haven't taken any refugees.
Of course, because this is what our people are expecting from our government. That's number one. This is why our government was elected. This is why Poland is so safe. This is the reason why we had not even one terrorist attack. Look at the streets in Poland, and we can be called populists, nationalists, racists. I don't care. I care about my family and about my country.
And I don't think it's fair that you are unbalanced, you are one-sided. You look only at the opinion of those ones who are frustrated because they lost elections. They wanted to fire that government.
Okay,
and that government won. Sorry, that government won the third consecutive election with a constitutional majority. Why don't we respect the decision of the people?
The problem with the EU is it believes in tolerance, diversity and human rights.
But is it your
and
problem
you
or
are
what?
rejecting them all.
But
so
why do
maybe
we do so?
it isn't for you.
Why do you insult a country of
Tolerance,
10 million people?
diversity and human rights.
Yeah.
Because of the laws you're now introducing. They're not my laws.
They
They're the laws of your
but
government.
they are not against European values. They are not against the European values. I understand that the liberal mainstream doesn't like our laws. But we have nothing to do with them in this regard because it is the Hungarian voters whose expectations we have to fulfill.
Thank you. Mr. Farage, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. As Mr. Moscovici said at the start of this, the leak of all these papers and lists of people with offshore holdings has come about because of the Society of Investigative Journalists. But what's not been said this morning, and I think is relevant, is that the funding of these investigations came from one George Soros. Now, I say this at a time, I'm going to come back to so what, and it may have some personal interest for you as well. I say this at a time when the use of money and the influence it may have had on the Brexit result or the Trump election has reached a level of virtual hysteria. Just last week, the Electoral Commission in the UK launched an investigation to find out whether the Leave campaign took offshore money or Russian money. This came about as a result of questions asked in the House of Commons by one Ben Bradshaw, somebody linked to an organisation called Open Society. I just wonder, when we're talking about offshore money, when we're talking about political subversion, when we're talking about collusion, I wonder whether we're looking in the wrong place. And I say that because George Soros recently gave Open Society, his organisation, which of course campaigns for free movement of peoples and supports supranational structures like the European Union, he recently gave it $18 billion. And his influence here and in Brussels is truly extraordinary. Open Society boast that they had 42 meetings last year with the European Commission. They've even published a book of reliable friends in the European Parliament. And there are 226 names on that list, including yours, sir. I thought you'd find this interesting. We even had last week Mr. Verhofstadt lobbying on behalf of Mr. Soros at the Conference of Presidents in a battle that is going on with Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary. If we're going to have a debate and we're going to talk about full political and financial transparency, well, let's do it. So I should be writing today to all 226 of you, asking some pretty fair questions. Have you ever received funds, directly or indirectly, from Open Society? How many of their events have you attended? Could you please give us a list of the meetings of all the representatives, including George Soros yourself? And I think this Parliament should now set up a special committee to look into all of this. And I say that because I fear we could be looking at the biggest level of international political collusion in history.
There's no doubt in my mind that the old order is crumbling and will crumble, and something new will be built in its place. Which leads me to my final point. The greatest sin of our media wasn't the corruption or indoctrination, or the unconditionally supporting the hands that feed them. It was something much more profound than this, something we need to pull back to see with proper clarity. For decades, the media has been constraining our vision and imagination, imposing a small and petty view of existence and our world at large. A steady diet of fear, of vapid celebrities, of contrived emotion. In a world of iPhone alerts and 24/7 news cycles, these attitudes become all-pervasive. They're shaping humanity as a whole into a far more base, ignoble, and petty version of what we're capable of being. It's independent and critical thinking that leads to the type of creativity and imagination that drives our world forward. And they've purposefully robbed us of this, boxed us in. The psychological reason for the constant drumbeat of fear is to create a feeling of powerlessness in the midst of a dark and dangerous world, dependent upon some big brother force from on high to solve our problems. Illusion on top of illusion on top of illusion. But, at long last, the conditioning is beginning to break. People are waking. Whether it's a matter of months or years, it's now clear that the corrupt edifice that's held such sway over the world at large is being destroyed. We have the opportunity not only to end the political and cultural subjugation, but far more importantly, to break out of the mental prisons that have constrained our view of what's possible. All of this serves to present an incredible opportunity, and one I'd like to leave you thinking about. Destruction may be jarring and disturbing, but it's also a prelude to creation. The simultaneous opening of countless doors with dizzying possibilities and opportunities. It'll be as if a signal being broadcast to create our zombie-like stupor were suddenly cut off, and we consciously awoke to the fact that we've been sleepwalking for decades. And now the world lies stretched before us, containing infinite possibilities, potential, and hope. We'll soon have the chance to create new broadcast signals, saving future generations from the paralyzing effects of the manipulation and deceit we've endured, and replaced instead with healthy and life-affirming content, allowing them to truly chart their own course, unhindered by the ravening wolves that have hijacked so much energy and derailed so many lives. There's still much to be done. Destruction is only the first step, and even this stage is far from complete. But for the first time, I'm seeing a flicker of light on the horizon that I haven't seen before, and one that I wasn't even certain I'd see in my lifetime. If we care deeply enough, and are willing to fight hard enough, that flicker has the potential to blaze with the power of 1,000 suns, with the power to check our freefall into the abyss at long last, and provide us with the solid foundation to begin our ascent once again, onward and upward. Falling is easy. It requires only inattentiveness, and gravity does the rest. Climbing takes work, but all that is truly great and worthwhile is lofty.
Yeah, one question that I have for each of you, this is something that I see all the time. Some people say to me, like, oh, well, you know, it wouldn't matter if humanity all didn't comply with the elites and rose up and whatever anyway, because they have phasers and quantum torpedo and alien wormhole technology, and they'll get a button and wipe us all out, and then, you know, rebirth humanity through the frozen embryos that are stored in the basement of the Vatican. You know, it's like the ultimate of nihilism. Like, we should do fuck all because aliens, whatever. Like, what would all of you say to people who are like that far into nihilism land?
Well, I'd like to take this first, if I may, Max. The concept of defeatism is to how to get rid of your enemy's defenses without actually having to fire a shot, more or less. So the way Sun Tzu works with this is he made his soldiers desperate when they had no hope of escape. So the story was that they were in a valley and they were surrounded on all sides by enemy soldiers. And what the general did is he destroyed all of the food and water so that even if they managed to retreat or escape, they would die. He did that when they were surrounded with no hope of escape, because it would motivate them in their desperation to get victory, because their enemy had food and water and supplies, and their only alternative was death. Make no mistake, ladies and gentlemen, we must fight with every fibre of our beings. Our words, our thoughts, our souls, and even our bodies are now on the line. And the only question is, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, true. Absolutely true. You know, it's a really important time for us. It really is. And I want to say thank you to all the people that have stuck through me through all this stuff that's going on as well. I've received so many positive emails and so many messages of support through all this, and so many people have been kind of saying, I'm really proud of you for staying true to your principles, Max, through all this, and not just caving to the pressure. So, yeah, we're at a really important time, ladies and gentlemen, and we could change the world through simple non-compliance. You know, like I say, we're always forced to step outside our moral compass to comply to regulations and rules all the time, and we disregard the people around us. We're prepared to discard people around us because they don't have the same, you know, financial status or whatever as us, and it's all ridiculous. You know, it really is. You know, the story of a man I saw on the beach in California who was just sitting there crying, just crying, 70-year-old man. I said to him, what's wrong? Why are you crying? And he said, I just realized I could have done this 50 years ago. Just sat on the beach and just experienced life, because all that stuff that I thought meant something didn't. And I missed out on me because I thought it was about climbing to the top of the pile, you know. I've often said the change we could make if no one spent $1 for a day, if we all simply stayed home with our families and didn't spend any money for the day, the whole financial system would freak out. It would send a shockwave around the world, you know. And even the protests that we do, we go marching in the street to do all this stuff, and we think we've done something. It's just a pressure relief valve. The best protest we could do would be stay home with our family and to love each other. We do that and the world changes. It's really not that hard, and it's so obvious that people can't see the forest for the trees. So people who think that simple non-compliance wouldn't work, I don't know, they're not looking at the bigger picture. They think the system is real, but it's just a state of mind. It's just an idea. You know, that's a conversation with a police officer a long time ago. You know, you're in the state of Queensland, you need to abide by the state of Queensland. I said, you know, what is the state of Queensland? He says, where you're standing. I said, well, I'm standing on Earth. You know, I was in a state of quiet enjoyment before you came along. Now I'm in a state of confusion at your claim that I'm in a state of Queensland. What is that? You know, and he walked away because it's a mental state. It's just an idea. This whole system is just an idea. That's the simplicity of the whole thing. You know, as soon as people realise it's just an idea and we don't actually have to do any of this, and they can allow others around them to think differently and simply respect people, it'll change the world in a day. Is that going to happen? Doubtful, but that's how simple it would actually be. So yeah, for your humble consideration. Now, thanks for having me on, guys. It's been an interesting conversation. I hope you got something from all that New Zealand stuff, and I hope I don't get you in trouble with anything. I think it's really important, man. I really think it's important.
Richard, just to back you up and just encapsulate that offer of Max's point, all the revolutions throughout history and all wars throughout history have commonalities. All wars have been won by tactics and technology, okay? And all revolutions have been won by a tiny fraction of the population who would not give up.
Richard, I'd like to know if you have anything to add to what Vinny and Max said.
Nope.
Alrighty.
Pessimism, nihilism, cynicism, defeatism, These and similar forms of black-pilled negativity are both toxic and contagious. We need to purge ourselves of these tendencies. They're not ours. They're foreign and unhealthy and destructive. We tend to like to think of reality as something that just is, and the manner in which we think or speak about it is merely an after-the-fact recounting, having little to no bearing on reality itself. This couldn't be more wrong. Our reality isn't composed of a litany of black and white facts, but rather a subjective story being told in real time. Several storytellers compete to dominate the narrative, and all contribute to help steer the story to some extent, creating our norms and that foundational understanding of our existence that the majority tends to agree on and use as their starting point as they navigate the world. But the jarring truth is that this center point is always conjured. It's an invention, a storyline we collectively choose to buy into, and one that could shift profoundly at any moment. For example, one could make the statement, "America is great," and give 1,000 compelling reasons as to why this is the case, and, likely, at the end of this long recitation, create some belief and enthusiasm in a crowd of people with regards to the greatness of America. One could make the statement, "America is horrible," and give 1,000 compelling reasons as to why this is the case, and again, likely win over much of that same crowd, provided they hadn't just heard the other speech. We need to consider the implications of this. The manner in which we subjectively choose to view and speak about our world quite literally shapes our reality from the ground up. I can't stress enough how simple and animalistic and herd-like our wiring is relative to popular conception. I suspect those watching this video, even solely based on the fact that you're seeking out alternative viewpoints, have attained a bit more self-mastery on this front than those on the other side of the ideological fence. But none of us are completely immune to these innate tendencies. Consider the exceedingly strange concept of laugh tracks in sitcoms. Laugh tracks are added to TV shows because they work. They serve their purpose with supreme efficiency. Hearing others laugh makes us far more likely to laugh ourselves, just as seeing someone yawn often triggers a yawn of our own. Or picture yourself playing a game with a friend and hearing them say, "This is stupid." Almost instantly, the game seems a bit more stupid, perhaps silly and pointless and inconsequential, a waste of time. Picture the same experience with the friend saying, "This is great, I love this." Instantly, you're able to see the brighter points of the activity. You find what's enjoyable about it and allow yourself to enjoy it a bit more than you might have otherwise. Our words create and shape our reality. We're constantly seeking to operate on a similar frequency to those around us, which means we readily adopt the frame or lens through which others see the world as we listen to them speak. We do this out of necessity. Speaking personally, I know that communication or mutual understanding would be impossible if I didn't possess that ability we're all blessed with of intuitively and automatically putting myself in the shoes of the other party, insofar as I'm able, as a means to understand where they're coming from as we communicated. I need as full a context picture as possible in order to best understand how you intend the words you're using to be understood. Which means, to some extent, I need to try to view the world from your vantage point as we converse. During this period of time, I'm adopting your perspective to some extent. I'm seeing reality through your eyes. And if what I hear from you resonates with me, I carry a portion of this reality away with me and make it my own. Something like a little transfusion of worldviews, passed from one individual to another. Though we rarely stop to recognize it, there's a tremendous responsibility in this. We're all actively wiring and rewiring one another, molding and shaping each other's brains in a literal sense. We're ever so slightly reorienting each other's frequency. Now, if we're taking in news from a network we deeply distrust, for example, we may have our guard up and be able to reject much of what's being communicated. At least all that's being directly and obviously communicated, that which we recognize well enough to block. When we're listening to someone we trust or resonate with, what they communicate to us gains more purchase in our minds, making it all the more important that we be cognizant of our effect on our peers. Our expressed sentiments don't exist in a vacuum. They rattle around in the heads of those who hear them forever. Whether they're at the forefront or in the deepest recesses, something seen or heard can never be unseen or unheard, and everything leaves some imprint. One of the reasons some people express black-pilled sentiments is our strong desire to not be seen as naive. Because those subversives that have taken the reins of our culture are cynical and nihilistic, for decades they've naturally painted these characteristics in a positive light, thereby improving our impression of these traits. It's now seen as quite cool and hip to be someone who doesn't care about anything, who mistrusts everyone, who can lie to or make a fool of everyone else, but never allow it to happen to him. In this environment, those who insult and mock everything, or those with purely negative expectations from the world, can then enjoy a smug and condescending chuckle when things do turn out poorly, in a "see, I told you so" manner. This strikes me as the epitome of a Pyrrhic victory, and certainly nothing to be proud of. And if you find yourself hearing these words and wanting to counter with, "But we can't delude ourselves and live in some fantasy world of optimism as Rome burns to the ground around us," we're very much in agreement here. I'm certainly not asking that we collectively embrace delusion, but rather the polar opposite. It's the bleak and hopeless vision that's true delusion. It's this worldview that's been artificially contrived and injected from the outside by subversive elements, far more trained in the realm of manipulation and psychological mechanisms of control than we. In actuality, we're very much like a sleeping giant, one that only needs to wake to its own power for the game to be won. And yet, hopeless and angry is the mold they've created and perpetuated for the far right. A tiny and powerless minority up against an all-powerful, omnipresent, godlike force, in a culture war they could never hope to win. Embracing this point of view, with all due respect, shows a complete ignorance of precedent, a lack of historical context. Anyone that traces our journey back through the branches of Indo-European cultures, observing the unconquerable spirit and strength of will and resilience stretching back to the very dawn of recorded history, can't help but know that our total defeat is impossible, unless we decide to make it inevitable. And once you've made this realization, you can't help but get angry with those pretending that if we're simply outnumbered, or outmoneyed, or out-influenced at the moment, then we're doomed. This is idiocy, and it's contagious idiocy, that, whether knowingly or unknowingly, works to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. When an element of the story being told is accepted by an individual, this acceptance helps further solidify the foundation of this element, instantly making it more believable and more real, to both the storyteller and the listener, and thus anyone they subsequently converse with. Picture that individual picking up a hammer and nails and setting about to help build a physical structural foundation, along with all others accepting the same storyline element. Regardless of whether this element is true, the greater number of individuals that believe it, the more true it becomes. The more solid its foundations upon which to build out still more derivative ideas and concepts. One of the first big red flags regarding those so aggressively pushing the "it's all hopeless" mindset was reading through the handbooks and guides of those directly subversive elements that infiltrate our communities, usually for pay, sometimes as a hobby. Nearly all of their tactics center around demoralization and the cultivation of a feeling of hopelessness. They know full well if they're able to succeed in creating that deep-seated feeling of "we haven't a hope in the world," they've essentially won the battle already. If we all constantly tell one another we have no hope, we officially have no hope. One of the best analogies would be soldiers on a battlefield. Skilled generals throughout history knew full well that morale was everything. The first side to break loses, and the first side that says to itself, "We're going to win at any cost," has almost guaranteed itself victory, even if the odds are against them. Very few armies have ever gone to the extreme of this any-cost pledge, of course, with the exceptions being cases like the Spartans at Thermopylae, who ironically did technically lose the battle, so this may seem like a strange example to cite. But did they really lose in the broader scheme? Not only did their actions help prevent the Persians from conquering their homeland, but their courage and heroism will live on into eternity, serving to strengthen their honor and reputation for themselves and their culture, both within the lifetime of their nation, as well as for their genetic and cultural descendants into posterity. Their energy lives on, and insofar as their culture represented the good and noble and healthy, the strength of the memories of their immortalized actions served to turn the world towards the good, towards the strong and noble and healthy, and served to remind us what it means to be a man. There's a reason nations punished those vocal defeatists on the front line nearly as aggressively as traitors or deserters, and a reason why opposing forces always spend such a great deal of time and energy on demoralization operations. An army can be destroyed through such psychological tactics. There's a reason generals have always sought to give stirring speeches before conflicts. These speeches are an energy and strength infusion. They can serve to inspire men to act far more energetically and decisively, not only increasing the chances of winning a battle, but potentially saving lives, and avoiding a long, depressing, drawn-out stalemate. Mentality and perspective matters tremendously. They want us acting like children, huddled together in a corner, whispering about how bad our parents are and telling jokes about them behind their backs, marginalized, submissive, and afraid. Whereas we need to wake to the fact that we are the fucking parents in this clown world, the last remaining adults in the room with open eyes and clear vision, representing a lofty and illustrious tradition without equal. And that these actual petulant children and subversive outsiders, incapable of true leadership or proper governance, have taken over the home, and will destroy it if we don't soon restore the natural order. We can either grant one another hope, inspiration, and infuse one another with energy and spirit, or we can do the opposite and paint a hopeless and bleak picture, and thereby mutually depress and drain one another. And again, the true power to decide this outcome doesn't lie on the other side, but with us. We're fully capable of making either of these potential futures a reality. It's all a case of which we collectively choose to speak into being. Choose victory.
Secret code? No. Poems, no less. Poems, everybody. The laddie reckons himself a poet. Money gets back. I'm all right, Jack. Keep your hands off my stack. New car, caviar, 4-star daydream. Think I'll buy me a football team. Absolute rubbish, laddie. Get on with your work. Repeat after me. An acre is the area of a rectangle whose length is 1 furlong and whose width is 1 cubit. But in the town it was well known when they got home at night. They went and psychotic wives would punch them with an inches of their life. We don't need no thought control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone. Just another brick in the wall. All in all, you're just